So, oh, let's pop you on mute if you're not already. Okay. So just feeling that the toes can spread, and just feeling that the front of the snooker ball heel can get pulled down into the ground. We come back into the front of the ankles. And just start to pull that down into the ground. It's that tap root that when we pull the front of the snooker ball heel down into the ground, the toes naturally extend away towards the end of your mat, and we start to get this deep lengthening that starts to happen within the very, very center of the foot. So when we roll onto the outer edge of the foot, and we can roll onto the inner edge of the foot, the knees stay nice and still. That starts to create space in the center of the foot, which then starts to soften the joints. So we're looking at that space in the ankle, and then space behind the knee, and then space behind the front of the hip and the top of the leg. So that's sort of that crease where the top of the leg meets the front of the hip. We start to create space there. And where we are in the feet directly affects how we feel in these different lower joints. So it starts to relax the back of the pelvis. The sort of the tighter the fascia is of the foot, the tighter it is around the back of the pelvis and the hips. So if we really want to create space there, we have to start with the original interface, which is the sole of the foot. So just feeling the wiggly parts of the toes into your mat, and just noticing where the tendency lies, whether we like to be more on the inner edge or the outer edge of the foot, and whether there's toes that are happy to present to the floor and other toes not so much. And as we just wiggle the toes, just noticing how that impacts the back of the pelvis. And then how does that feel in the hips? And can we pick the toes up and spread them out and feel that spreading happens all the way through the center of the foot through the deep arch into the ankle. Maybe we feel a broadening on the back of the hips, and a reworking perhaps of the sacrum at the center, and the two hip bones either side are able to drop back slightly towards the ground. We can put gravity buttons underneath them and pull them down into the ground. Can we notice that maybe one side of the hips are slightly heavier on the ground than the other? And can we make touch equal across the back? And then that encourages the front of the tummy to soften. And we start to drop back into the low spine. So if we bring our hands onto the front of the ribs and start to just draw those back towards the spine, we want to get that broadness into the deep back of the ribs. Can we breathe into the smile on the base of the back of the ribs, which allows a lengthening to happen through the rib spine, into the neck, into the head. So we start to lengthen up towards the crown of the head from the solar plexus. So when we've got the hands on the front of the ribs, it's just smoothing the ribs back towards the spine and then down towards the pelvis. And just noticing where we run into resistance. For many of us, we tend to be a little bit caught up in the back of the ribs. So can we really feel that the organs at the solar plexus can sink back? We can carry lots of tension there. So can we let that sink back and soften? Can we let the lungs and the heart sink back and soften? Can we really drop in through kind of where the, we've got this lovely diaphragm, we've got the liver and the stomach and all of those lovely organs all sitting in this solar plexus. Can we really just feel that we can soften all that back towards the spine? And then the shoulder blades can get pulled down into the ground. The collarbones feel like they're going to slide off the edges of the shoulders. So if we take the arms over the body and just bring the hands together to make that loop, pointy parts of the elbows looking towards the thighs. And we just feel that the long arm bones can go back through their sockets into the side of the ribs, into the side of the waist. So maybe as the arms travel towards the top of your mat, we feel that nice reconnection inside of the ribs, sides of the waist. And we know that when the arms are up over the body, they're connecting in through the shoulders and connected to the front of the body. But when the arms come up somewhere past 45 degrees, we start to get into the back. So can we really draw the ribs down into the ground? And again, just noticing what's happening at the solar plexus, whether that tenses up. Can we leave that to sink back? So we just keep dropping back into the ground. We can create a deep space into the underarm. And down the side of the ribs. So can we feel that each individual rib can start to have space? And it may be that as the arms, every time these are your exploratory movements, so we keep coming back to the center, and bringing the arms back up over the body is the same process as taking them away. It's not just mindlessly returning to the start, it's letting the arms come back through, connecting through the ribby spine, each individual vertebrae, and then the arms come back to the center. So it may be, if you're happy with your arms, if you're just working with arms, it's absolutely fine to do that because there's a lot going on in there. But if you want to just drop the right heel into the ground and send the leg away from the deep waist, the underside of the ribs, and of course the arms through the sockets into the underside of the ribs, we get this lengthening that happens from, it's like dropping a stone into the center of the body at that ribby process, which sends the ripples of the limbs outwards. And it's working through these frame by frame by frame. There's a process here It's very easy for us to extend legs away and, you know, the back of the knee just collapses into the floor. It's very easy for those of us that are flexible to just take the arms up over the head and flop those into the floor as well. So it's looking at how are we gathering into the spine? How are we bringing the limbs in through the body to create space into the front of the hip, to create space in the underarm, to create space at the front of the ribs, to broaden the back of the ribs. That smile at the back of the ribs is key. So it may be that we don't get to what we would consider to be the end goal. Where are we in a state of structural integration where the limbs are coming into the body, and where are we when we're in a state of collapse and the limbs are hanging out of the sockets? There is a very clear definition between the two. Change the legs if you haven't already. It's a great exploratory process to have in your home practice. We get very enamoured with the end goal. Can we notice how different aspects of the heel present to the ground? We can slide our heel away through the very centre of the heel. But what if we explored the slight outer side of the heel? Or if we shifted the foot towards the midline, towards the centre line, could we explore the inner side of the heel as the leg lengthens away? And you'll feel it. There's different muscle firing sequences to be had here. Your anchorage is the arms. So let them be dropping back through the sockets and going through the ribs. And there's a real definite pull of the ribs back down into the ground. You know, and with the hands clasping each other, helps to pull the wrists and the elbows open. You know, arms become straight because the long arm bones are being pulled back into the solar plexus, and the fingers are being pulled away towards the sky. So can we stay with that over the body initially and then retain that as the arms move through their range towards the top of the mat? And we start to really notice differences in that, because arms are heavy, they're a good half a stone in weight each, so it's very easy for us to bend at the elbows and release the pressure. Don't have to work so hard when the elbows are bent. But when you've got hands that are being pulled away towards the sky, you can feel that soft inner elbow gets pulled open. The soft underarm gets pulled open, and then the central core system has to work a little bit harder. If it's an interesting exploration, we can pull one hand with the other hand and notice how that changes across the broad back of the body. Notice how that changes the shoulder blades. Arms work very hard to get out of their sockets because they want to grab things. It's important because the things that we grab mostly are food and we want that. So the leg sliding away just adds that extra dynamic. You know, we spend a lot of time very closed at solar plexus. So can we let the legs pull the front of the tummy open? Can we let the legs pull the front of the hip open? And you might find that one side is easier than the other. So the next time we come back to the centre, and if you're halfway through your movement, take your time. So the next time the leg comes back in towards you, the knee can float in. And the long leg bone can drop back through the sockets into the back of the pelvis. So it's interesting to notice if the pelvis rolls in towards you. We want a heavy, heavy sit bone that's pulling down into the ground, which rolls the pelvis away. And we want that. So we keep the ribs pulling back into the ground. Doesn't mean that we lose the lumbar curve, because we do want that. So we need a space at the low spine, not so deep that you can drive a bus underneath it, but we're certainly not pulling the spine into the ground. And when we find that we've got the heavy, heavy sit bones, this frees the front of the thigh and we get space here. Space at the hip flexor, if you like. So when we're changing over sides, we're just letting the foot come back down into the ground, let it drop, and then changing over into the other knee that can just float in towards you. And just establishing that connection through the back of the hips and the shoulders. And we can let that foot come down to the ground. We change over sides again. So we're just letting that initial knee float in towards you. You can give it a little bit of a wave if that feels good. Back of the pelvis doesn't move. The movement is just in the socket joint. So can we feel that the foot on the floor is being pulled down into the ground, and the foot that is now coming in towards you can be pulled up towards the sky? And just like the arms, the long thigh bone gets pulled down into the back of the pelvis, and the back of the heel gets pulled up towards the sky, and that pulls the back of the knee open. And we just want to notice here, it's very easy to get caught up in the hamstrings, because obviously the hamstrings will stretch at some point or be affected at some point. Back of the calf, same thing. So can we keep dropping the arms back through their sockets? Can we keep dropping the legs back through their sockets? What's happening at the ribs and the underside of the tummy? So it feels like the hands and the feet get pulled up towards the sky, and this starts to pull the elbows and the knees open and challenge the muscles there. You know, we work with the knees soft a lot because there's quite a few of us here that are very, very flexible, but actually staying in that state of where we perpetually keeping the knees and the elbows bent all the time means that we don't really get into the strengthening aspect of the muscles of the back of the leg and the inside of the arms. So we use the weight of the arms and the legs to our advantage. If we kept pulling this foot up towards the sky, it will pull the back of the pelvis off the ground. That's kind of where we're going with it. Not with your hands, Emma, I can see you. No pulling. It's keeping that broadness into the back of the pelvis. And we keep returning to the spine. Change over legs if you haven't already. Remember, these are your exploratory processes. So Sarah Jane, let the hands be pulled up towards the sky more. More. Challenge the side of the ribs. If you kept being pulled in this direction, the back of your ribs will get pulled off the floor. Yes, it looks much better. It's a stronger movement. It looks good, Margaret. And this helps us to keep sending the work back into the centre of the body. Yes, looks much better, Pam. Does that feel different? I think it's good. And we just keep with that pulling up. Notice where we reach the edge of resistance in the back of the leg. And what needs to happen in order to shift that edge of resistance to a little further on. It may be that the front of the hip needs to drop back a little bit more. It may be that we need to drop through behind the tummy more. You know, behind the viscera. Connecting with T12, the base of the ribs and the top of the lumbars, is a tricky business because it's very, very deep inside us. But the more we pull down through there, and the more length we get down into the sacrum and up into the back of the head, and then the more we can pull down, the more that sucks the limbs back through the sockets, and then we can use the extremities to be pulled away, take us in two directions at the same time. And you might have one leg that's more compliant than the other. It's hard work for the central core system. So just bringing the arms and the legs back down. Just taking the elbows out to the sides, just feeling that the pointy parts of the elbows can get pulled down into the ground, feet get pulled down into the ground. And we can just take the knees over to one side. So as the knees come over to one side, we can press through the big toe, which will give you a nice stretch through the front of the quad and the side of the waist. And you can pull down through the heel, which takes the leg back through the socket into the side of the waist, through the ribs into the leg, into the arm. It becomes a body wide event. Again, it's very easy in our laying twist to just hang the legs out of the sockets, and that pulls the back of the pelvis. We don't want that. So we use the feet pulling into the ground to sink the legs back through the sockets, and that makes the rotation come from the waist rather from the low spine. So when we pull the heels down into the ground, let the legs come through into the back of the pelvis. And it's the back of the pelvis that pulls down into the ground that brings the legs back to the centre. And then we can pull down through the feet and go in the other direction. And again, we can press with the big toe joint. Which gives you that stretch into the quad if that's what you're looking for. But it's exploring different parts of the feet that help to connect the legs into the deep waist. And then just letting the legs drop through their sockets, back to the centre. And just letting the knees float in towards you. And again, we're just letting the back of the pelvis roll away. Sit bones get pulled down into the ground. And we can come over onto whichever side is comfortable for you. And just coming forwards onto your tummy. So elbows around eye line, something like that. Because we want the elbows to pull down into the ground, just like we were doing when we were on our back. It's the same thing. So as the elbows pull down into the ground, it sends the long arm bones back through their sockets into the side of the ribs. And can we really pull the back of the ribs through the front of the ribs into the ground? So again, that takes us into the underside of the ribs again. The legs are pulling away, so the front of the hips can open and soften. Got those lovely headlights on the front of the hips that pull down into the ground, that draw the tummy back through their sockets. Draws the bunny back to the root socket. There is a socket there, it's called the mesentery. So if you trace back that V at the base of the ribs, take that all the way back into the spine. There's a universe packed in there. So can we let it go back into the spine? And then when we're back into the spine goes in two directions, pulling us down through the pelvis into the legs and pulling us up through ribs into the head. And I'm talking into the carpet, so I'm aware I might be a little bit muffly. So same thing. In that we're sending the long arm bones back through the ribs into the deep waist. And we start to draw the tummy button back towards the spine. Can we get into that very top of the lumbars and create space there? And let that broaden and soften back, so we actually feel that the organs get drawn back into the back of the ribs. And if you've just eaten, be careful with yourself, because we can get right into the guts of the matter here. If you haven't had your breakfast yet this morning, this is great for you, because you can wander around in there without too much interruption. You know, processes of digestion take quite a lot of energy and quite a lot of focus for the brain. So when we come into these practices, if the body's still quiet, you might find it a little easier. So we feel like somebody's got hold of the underside of the front of the foot, and the big toe joint can be pulled away towards the wall behind you. And just like we were doing on our back, the stronger the pull, the more the front of the hip gets pulled open, the more the front of the tummy gets pulled open, and that goes right up into the underside of the ribs. So the leg goes long, long, long initially. And if we keep following that, then it will come off the floor. But because the front of the hip gets pulled down into the ground, because the underside of the ribs broaden and soften enough, can we feel underneath the front of the collarbones? That place where collarbones start to blend into the front of the ribs, can we let that soften and broaden? Deeply affects the shoulder blades when we do. It's a part of us that we don't really pay too much attention to. If you follow the line of the collarbone out to the shoulder, where the collarbone and the shoulder meet, acromion process, for those of us that are anatomised. Can we create space there? We tend to be a little bit caught up at that very, very front of the shoulder. The shoulder blades tend to be a little bit round towards the front. So can we create space where the collarbone ends and the shoulder begins, and allow the shoulder blades to reposition themselves on the back of the body? And this reshape, this releases the ribs and allows the back of the ribs to sort themselves out. So you might find, as you've got a leg pulling away behind you, and of course the initial movement is long, but the ultimate movement is up. So if your foot and your leg are starting to leave the floor and we're starting to feel the front of the hip more, the more we come back through the ribs, you might find that there's a spaciousness that opens up into the underarm, there's a spaciousness at the front of the shoulder, and then one of the arms might start to leave the floor. Generally tends to be the opposite arm to the leg that's coming off the floor. But they're your exploratory movements. So finding what works for you. For those of you that teach and have home practices, useful to have a look at what it feels like to have a leg and an arm on the same side moving. But as a general rule, we work in opposites. It's a tangible fascial connection there that we can make between the big toe joint, the inside of the leg, the inside of the pelvis, the opposite inside of the ribs through into opposite thumb and index finger. So again, we start to feel that the underside of the arm is really allowed to get pulled open. And it's like somebody's got hold of your fingers. As the arm comes up off the floor, it's like someone's got hold of your fingers and they're pulling the fingers away, because the more the arm goes away, the more the long arm bone is pulled back into the solar plexus. So we start to bypass the shoulder joint. And we really want to do this because these are the joints that we wear out, shoulders and hips. So can we start to bypass that and send it back to the central core system? You're right, Pam. Pam. You and me both, love.
I just got a bit lost there, so I think I'm just staying where I'm at. But I was doing both arms and both legs, really. Just feeling a
That's
little
ambitious.
bit. Well, just feeling them, not
Yeah.
necessarily doing anything with them. But it felt a bit sort of skydiver-ish.
Yeah. If you work with John, he's currently, that's where he is. Or, well, he was 6 months ago. Well, probably, yeah, it is, isn't it? It's middle of the year now, isn't it? So, yeah, when I saw him just after Christmas, I think. That's what he's working with. Now he's kind of, you know, next level stuff. And that kind of is where he is. He's laying on the floor skydiving. I kind of liken this to maybe like floor swimming. It's that, you know, if we were suspended, and you were absolutely right there, Pam, if we were suspended in skydiving or if we were suspended in water, we would feel that it would be almost like we start to blow apart, don't we? We start to come to pieces. And it's an interesting one because it kind of throws the brain under the bus a little bit, because it's like, well, how do I get strength and integrity if I'm starting to create space in the joints and I'm getting, you know, I'm almost like disconnecting myself. So where is the connection in disconnection? But actually, the more we create the space, the more draw there is back into the center. So we become spacious and trying to find the, it's great, isn't it? Here's your job: articulate the experiential. Yeah. But it's that, you know, like jellyfish. I'm always fascinated when we go to the aquarium, because obviously family in the southwest, so we've got the National Marine Aquarium here. I love jellyfish because they suck in to come out. And when, you know, you can watch them for hours. I do watch them for hours, very boring. But it's watching that contractual nature, that we're not just in continual expansion, but when we put ourselves into expansion, there is a natural contraction that comes with it. There's a rhythm to it, a peristalsis to it almost, that is happening all the time. But like our heartbeat and like our breathing, we don't need to do it. We think we do. And that's why, you know, being in that state that you were in a second ago, Pam, is so useful. Because if we just feel and take the opportunity to just feel, how is it if I, you know, and this is relaxation, not the state of collapse. And from there it becomes extraordinarily powerful, because if you stay in that space for long enough, it will take you back to the spine, and you'll feel the same thing with the spine. This is why John, last time I was working with him, we did skydiving for 90 minutes. So we're not staying here for 90 minutes, by the way, but you know, he holds his postures for 90 minutes, you know, 60 to 90 minutes to feel. It takes a long time to get from spacious fingers all the way through the joints to the spine. So that's why we stay for so long. But there is a point around the 55, 60 minute mark where you start to hit the spine. You've stayed with your fascia long enough that you get there, and then you start to feel that the vertebrae start to take themselves to pieces. It's an amazing process, but it takes a lot of patience and you know, quite a lot of resilience. Laying on your face for 90 minutes, I don't recommend it. Yes, flat nose. Flat nose with every class. But the head repositions itself. So when we're here, the prime restrictor to getting our arms back into the spine is here. It's this acromion process. We don't take our arms up over our head anymore. We've talked about this before. But this range that we have available to us between the collarbone and between the long arm bones is key. But of course, we've got a world at the moment that's taking us in the other direction. So we're folding in on ourselves rather than finding the broadness. So we start with space. You know, the arm is heavy, so it can pull that space open for us. And then we stay there long enough that we start to come through the ribs and the chest starts to expand. Does that help?
Yeah, and I've just had another little ping off here, and it sounds really daft, but I hadn't really, it's really bonkers. I hadn't really thought of my arms being connected at the front.
Yeah,
Do you know what you tend to
I do.
think of the arms and the shoulder blades and the back of the arms, but
Yes.
you don't really, and it's, as I say, um, think of this connection,
Yeah.
which is, it sounds silly, but we just don't think about these things, do we, sometimes?
Absolutely. And it's such a good observation, Pam, because if you close your eyes and think of shoulder, what's the first bone that pops into your head? Scapula. Always. You know, we never go, ooh, collarbone, humerus. They come second. It's not that they're not there, but if you say to anybody shoulder blade. Always, every time. So yes, we are very connected to the back because trapezius is here and so is latissimus, and they are big. So again, if you know, for those of us that have a bit of anatomy, if you think about muscles of the shoulder, the first one that comes up is trapezius. It's you wouldn't say pectoralis, but actually, you know, your pecs and your sternal fascia match the back of your body well. So we've got the structures there. And like I say, generally, this is the shape that we're in. We're quite rounded on the back, so the muscles tend to be quite long. So they're chatting to us because they're usually a little bit long. And the muscles on the front are a little bit sleepy. And also, for those of us that have got boobage, so if you are blessed with the boobage, the other thing is that as teens, we're already rolling around ourselves a little bit, and we tend to switch off and disconnect a little bit from here. You know, no women, boobs or no, walk down the street sort of, you know, with our shoulders back presenting to the world. So, you know, it's in our emotional anatomy that we tend to be a little bit more disconnected on the front and very connected on the back. And for those of us that have taught for a long time, you know, 80s and 90s, that sort of stuff, we just didn't talk about boobs and the other bits because, you know, it was all, you know, lots of scandals and stuff like that. So in a fitness world, we kind of cut out the boobs and the groins. It was all, you know, we didn't, if you go for a massage, they massage your back. Don't massage anything else. Go to Thailand, whole different experience. You know, it's a bit of a shocker. But that's because your big muscles are here. And your big muscles are here. And we've got big muscles under the breast tissue. So actually getting reconnected with here is really important, and it deeply affects how we feel in our shoulders and also our stress response, because trapezius is connected to the fight and flight response. So when we're rolling round like this, we're signalling to the brain that we are in a potentially dangerous situation or potentially unsafe situation. So while we're here on our mats at home and in our safe spaces, then we can start to make inroads into here. So yeah, it's an interesting one. It's a rewiring to be had of thinking about, I'm working on a socks theory at the moment for anyone that was in on Saturday. This idea of this sleeve, this kind of long sock that is taking you all the way back to spine, but it encompasses everything. And it's interesting because as soon as we think of, you know, gloves or socks, we've got fingers, maybe elbows, but with, you know, anything past there takes work. It really does. And it's a reworking to the brain that this is a viable option. Pectoralis is a big muscle, you know, big group of muscles. Perfectly acceptable for us to use them. And can we unbutton the collarbone from the front of the rib? Because again, collarbones want to rotate. And if they don't rotate, shoulder blade has to overcompensate. Because if something doesn't move, someone else has to. And that's where a lot of our shoulder pains come from. Not because, you know, people go, oh, I've got tight shoulders. You haven't got tight shoulders. Your shoulders are, you know, the back of the shoulder is doing too much. Has to move past its end range to compensate for the lack of range in collarbone. Does that make sense? So for those of us that have busted one of those as a child, my partner's got one, you can feel it in the fascia in the collarbones. And for those of us that do hands-on work, you know, get your paws on somebody that busted their collarbone as a kid. It's a really interesting dynamic of tissue makeup where the reparation has happened in the bone and the fascia will be more dense. But of course it grips the collarbone. So I meet a lot of people with frozen shoulders that have busted a collarbone as a child. It's a beautiful bendy bone that goes down like a sack of spuds when children fall off bikes or trees. You know, because if we're going down, the shoulder tends to hit the floor first, and it's the collarbone that takes the break. This is good. So, had a little doodly what's it off into skydiving. If skydiving is comfortable for you, for me, the first time I did skydiving with John Stoke, not comfortable, did not like the idea of falling at 1,000,000 miles an hour towards the earth. Swimming was more my thing. And then somebody told me that they felt like they were drowning if they were face down in the water, and they preferred falling towards the earth at a rapid rate. So something will come that is quite not so quite offensive to the brain, because we want to feel safe while we're doing this stuff. But it's an interesting one, because when we feel that that's on the front, can we create that? And we'll do that in another session, but can we create that on the front of the pelvis as well? Because the potential is there at the process on the front of the hip, where the long leg bone connects to the front of the hip, connects to the front of the tummy. We can do that. We can almost let the legs, you know, fly out behind us and create lots of space there as well. So there's a lot to be done. Again, pelvis likes to tilt under. It's part of the fight and flight response. So again, getting that length to rectus abdominis and the front sheath of the tummy repositions the pelvis, but it helps us if we've got tight hips and tight hip flexors again. This is good. So we're going to bring the hands underneath the shoulders and just get that elbow pull down towards the heels. And can we broaden the collarbones here? This is something we've been looking at for a few weeks now. And Ronnie's not with us this morning, but this is Ronnie's not so favourite. And for many of us, it's a not so favourite, because it kind of, you know, we want to challenge the brain. So when we've got hands here underneath the shoulders and the elbows pulling down, it's sending the arms back to the spine, draws the head with it, and starts to pick the front of the ribs up into the spine. So what we find is when we're going back into our child pose, we can press with the shoulders and we get this sort of soggy middle. We don't want to be there. So we've got these legs that are pulling away towards the wall behind you. And then we've got these elbows that are pulling the rib cage down into the tummy. It's a different set of muscles. You'll feel it very much on the back of the whatever this long thing at the top of your body is called, arm. So you feel it into the it's in there somewhere, triceps. So back of the arms. We want the back of the arms, the shoulder blades to drop, broaden us onto the collarbones, so that now when we lift, the head is coming in and we're lifting like somebody's got a piece of elastic around the base of the spine, base of the rib spine, top of the lumbars. So we're getting pulled from this point back. It's like there's a pop stud at the tummy here at the V shape in the ribs, and that will take us back into our child pose. The feet pull down into the ground, big toe joints in the inside of the heels, which keeps the sit bones running true. So we're not, you know, the sit bones don't look in towards each other. Notice if the pelvis wants to tilt under. It's an interesting process, because when we work in this way, we start to see the habits that we would have. So for me, I'm a serial bench presser. I like all of that. If I can do it with the shoulders and not with the core, job's a good one, but it's not useful. So can we keep sending the work back to the very, very centre of the body? So we get picked up from solar plexus, drawn up towards the sky, and then back into our child pose that way. It's like the spine is picked up and then slid back on runners. Something like that. It's hard work for tummies. And yes, rest if you need to, if you're having a resty day, and that's fine. So the feet pulling down into the ground will lift your hips. Hands pulling down into the ground will lift your shoulders. And then the ribs pulling back into the spine will lift the rest of you. Coming back through. It is a practice, not a perfect. Very revealing when it comes to our habitual or compensatory patterns that we have. Yeah, looks good, Pam. So once we've reached there, and it doesn't matter where we get to, it's a practice, not a perfect, that one. And you know, our child poses is again, it's not a good grief, that was really hard and now I'm going to collapse pose. It's a pull of the feet down into the ground. We've still got space in the front of the ankle, we've still got space in the back of the knee, and we've still got space in the front of the hip. So we haven't collapsed into ourselves. So it gives us opportunity there. So for those of us that are a little bit longer and a little bit further along in the practice, downward dog is here. You know, your cat pose is here. It gives us the opportunity to just feel the work that we've been doing. More feet, Sarah Jane. Front of the ankle, front of the shin will pick up the hip.
It's interesting because twice when I wasn't thinking about it, I've done it. I've had the feeling of it.
Yes.
Twice. And I haven't said anything apart from to myself.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I thought, God, oh my goodness, I've done it. You know, just the first time, yes.
Yeah. Because we don't have to do as much as we think we do, because your body can do it. It's just the brain goes, oh no, I'm really heavy, I can't do it. You know, we've already made the decision about, you know, we talk about core strength a lot here. It's like, have I got the core strength? Can I do it? And then, like you say, when you're not thinking about it, body just moves. It's happy to do it for itself, you know, and it's in those moments when we can get out of our own way that we see what the body's actually capable of. You know, we don't have to push and pull it into it. So when it's working as the joined up whole, it's almost, you know, we call it Wu Wei, don't we? The effortless effort. And then as soon as the head gets involved and it's like, oh yeah, it's really heavy and I've got to do this and
so heavy.
how to turn your body into a bag of wet cement in one easy step. Just think about what you're about to do, because we've already, you know, your brain has already made the decision about how hard this is going to be or not. I really like the helium balloons. You know, obviously your organs are pressurized higher than they are in the outside world. So you've got helium balloons on the inside of your spine. And when we think about helium balloons that could float the spine back, all of a sudden the brain is temporarily distracted. It is like a toddler. So it's like, ooh, pretty helium balloons. And we've floated back. My teacher always used to use the analogy of the just the sucking back. You would just sort of roll back like the wave. That's Vander's analogy. You know, we've all got different pictures in our mind that we can cultivate about this, you know, light, lifty body that can float back. Has potential to do that. When we push the floor away, the body becomes very heavy. When we pull the ground, when we push the body, when we allow the body to be pulled down into the ground, the body floats back. And that's just because we shifted the dynamic of our mindset. No other thing has changed, which is fascinating.
Yeah, it is. It's such a big story, that. Yes.
It is. The power of your mind. Few people have said this in the last week, actually, and when I hear something 3 times or more, I pay attention. whether you can or whether you can't is real. That's true.
Yeah.
Because you've already decided. And that makes the difference. So if you've already decided that your core muscles are too weak to do this and your body is too heavy to do this, and all, you're right. And it will be borne out. And will be proved right. And we go, see, told you. And that will be, 24-year-old me with my teacher, told you couldn't do it. I had surgery. These days I do things that I, never thought were possible, but then I don't think anymore. Somebody said, what do you think? I try not to, as a general rule, because it makes up stories. And we see that every day. You go to the circus is here in Devon at the moment, and of course you know what those people look like, and you're like, oh, I don't believe it. Well, that's why. But everybody is capable of doing that. We're no different than anybody else. It's just a belief in ourselves and then the evidence to prove that we could. Because we're always a little bit shocked. We're like, oh, I didn't realise I could do that. But then, now you can. Like the 4-minute mile. That's always talked about a lot, the 4-minute mile. Couldn't do it. Nobody could do it. Roger Bannister did it, and then everybody did it. And it changed the game for everything. So it's that perception, that perceiving that we can do it. So when you're not thinking and it floats back, and then the thing for you, Sarah Jane, is, and I've been through this process and it's quite hilarious, is the brain goes, right, how did we do that and what do we need to do to replicate it? Where's it gone? I need to find the thing and we're going to do that again. And your body just goes, no, I'm not going to do it now. Now I am not going to. So it's how do we create the conditions for letting go, which is, meditation all of its own. This is good. This is good. So we're just going to come down to laying for a moment on your back. And if it's nice, and this is your own choice, if it's nice to bring the soles of the feet together and let the knees drop out to the side for a moment, then do. If it's too harsh on the lower back or the hips, don't worry about it too much. If you have cushions to hand and you want to stick them under each knee, then that can make you nice and comfortable. But if that's too much of a ball ache, just take some time out for a moment and just take the soles of the feet together, let the knees drop out. Feel that we've got that nice sacrum rolling away towards the heels. So we're not offending the lower back by changing the feet and leg arrangement. So we've got the long little toe sides pulling down into the ground. We've got some big toes and the inside of the heels connecting with each other. That nice rolling away of the sacrum. Ribs coming into the back of the body. Collarbones that we've just been messing about with. Might feel very different in the heart centre. So go gently with yourself. And then if it's nice to just rest the elbows into the ground with the hands on the side of the ribs or around the front of the tummy, to just find where the bones can rest. And we've got a lovely sling from the long little toe side that comes up the outer side of the legs and slings around the back of the pelvis, so you've got support. And the same for the elbows pulling down into the ground. You've got that, creates that lovely sling around the back of the arms, back of the chest, and then of course the lovely sling around the back of the head, which is, from your chin, the underside of your jaw, and round behind the ears, and then into the pointy part of the back of the head. So it's just feeling that we can rest back into these slings. We can be pulled down into the ground, which fires our connective tissue, which gives us this all over body support. It's like the wind. We can't see it, but we can feel its force and we know that it's there. And it's exactly the same with the connective tissue. We can't see it, but we can relax back into it, and then we feel it and we know that it's there as a support. And letting the breath just roll in and out. And then we're just going to give the fingers and toes a wiggle. Just taking the hands underneath the knees if they're still out to bring them back to the centre. And just feeling the feet into the ground. And then if it's nice, we're just going to take the legs long and the arms up over the head for a nice stretch through the body. And bringing the knees up to the chest, giving the knees a nice hug. Having a little rock from side to side, coming over onto whichever side is comfortable for you, returning up to sitting in your own time. Just taking a moment to check in with yourself, notice how your body feels. Good. You've worked hard today, lovelies. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you found that useful. It's been a pleasure as always.